my, grüne my, grüne my.
My name is Jacek Tlaga, and I work at the National Library of Poland, where I'm introducing new technologies to improve access to our cultural heritage. I'm dealing with historical documents, such as early printed books or manuscripts created centuries ago. Also, my hobby is related to the history and the language. To put it briefly, it is the reconstruction of pronunciation of historical languages. Practically, what I do is I choose some literary work of the past, one that I find appealing, and I attempt to reconstruct its pronunciation. The final result is a recording of my performance, my recitation. I have a YouTube channel where I publish these recordings, also a Facebook page. But these just are the final results of long inquiry, and every such inquiry can become a story of its own. So I would like to tell these stories. I even started a blog where I tried to write about this process, to write those stories. I was struggling. I found it really difficult to describe this whole process, all these interesting things that I found out into the written form. I was really reluctant to go on. And in September 2021, I went to the workshop on podcasting, and then I realized that this is it. This is the most appropriate medium. The best way to describe speech is to speak about it. Well, before I decided to finally record and publish my recitation, I have to know the sound of every vowel, every consonant. I need to know the meaning of every word. I need to have some basic understanding of the language. I need to know the historical context, the literary context. It's a very tedious and painstaking job. And I really wouldn't do that if I didn't find this absolutely fascinating. So I think of podcasting as a way to share my fascination with the subject. It might seem a very hermetic knowledge, narrow specialization. I think it would be interesting not only for the scholars, but really for everyone who is interested in literature, in history, in language. So I think of making this knowledge accessible through the podcast, where I can demonstrate certain pronunciations, certain sound effects used in poetry, how it works. Of course, I can never know if I'm right about the pronunciation. It's always a problem with historical reconstructions of any kind. And really, there's a lot of evidence which make it possible. One kind of evidence is what we know about modern languages. Methodically comparing them, we can reconstruct the earlier shape. The fundamental tool in historical linguistics is the comparative method, through which we can reconstruct the shape of the language in its earlier stages. The second kind of evidence, very important one, is material sources, the actual writings preserved to this day. I have a rule that I only reconstruct works for which the written records have been preserved. It's the bottom line. All the better if there are different versions which we can compare with each other. Particularly interesting are the differences in spelling, apparent confusions. However, all this must be very carefully, critically analyzed to avoid drawing wrong conclusions. Poetry is especially valuable due to the fact that its sound was deliberately shaped by its creators. We can learn a lot from the rhymes, alliterations, from the metrical forms, and all the kinds of intentional sound effects. Another type of evidence is descriptions of the language by contemporary authors. These were done for different reasons, like describing the grammar or developing a writing system appropriate for the language, for the pronunciation. Regardless of their intentions, they provide us with incredibly valuable evidence. For example, when I was participating in the project Danziger Ausrufer, Criers of Gdańsk, Gdańscy wywoływacze in Polish, it was series of what you can describe as early advertising slogans used by the merchants on the streets. The text and even the melody of those slogans, so to say, have been preserved, but they were in a language called Danziger Platt. It was a Low German dialect commonly used on the streets of Gdańsk. Studying various literary works from the more or less distant past, the sound of which I decide to reconstruct, I want to find out as much as possible about the societies in which they were created, the people who performed and listened to them and passed them on to the next generations of performers and listeners. This oral transmission could go on for hundreds of years. We can only get to know them because they were written down and survived in this written form, but they really only existed and functioned as a sound that did more than just convey the meaning. It was an integral part of the story, a part that was lost because it could not be recorded. So I believe that recreating the pronunciation brings us closer to experiencing these works as they really were. For me, digital culture is about tools and technologies which make it possible to share the knowledge and cultural heritage instantly all over the world. Does it mean that I'm participating in creation of digital culture? Yes, it does, as everyone else can be.